Welcome to Shades of Migraine, a podcast series created by the Association of Migraine Disorders. Migraine isn't black and white. It's blurry and shadowy. But there are many forces at work trying to change how we think about and deal with this disease. We hope you'll enjoy listening to a wide variety of voices, including the perspectives of both people living with migraine and those that are trying to help. Each will share their unique shade of migraine. In this episode, psychotherapist Mark Masulo describes the terrifying reality of being a cluster headache patient. While the prevalence of this disease is much lower than that of migraine, the number of traditional treatment options is also much lower, leaving many patients with little to no relief. Mark gives some good advice for those who may be feeling hopeless. So today I'm with Mark Masulo, a cluster headache patient. So Mark, tell me a little bit about yourself.
I'm 56. I am a psychotherapist and psychoanalyst. I live in Chicago. And I have been a cluster headache patient for about 32 years.
So tell me a little bit about cluster headache. There's so much people don't know.
Well, there's so much that the medical profession doesn't know. And it's a neurological pain disorder. Really, that's sort of the best way I can describe it. And it affects the trigeminal nerve in the face. And when one has an attack, I really don't even call it a cluster headache anymore. I call it an attack because it doesn't really feel like a headache. It feels like there's a sort of a foreign body inside the skull, trying to sort of crack open the skull from the inside. And it's a searing, burning, grinding pain that it starts out with a little tingle and in the temple, and within a few seconds it is at a full-blown 10 on the KIP pain scale. So it's a debilitating and incapacitating kind of pain.
I have so many questions.
Okay.
How long do they last?
Mine last for a couple of hours at a time, and they come several times a day when I'm in a cycle. They're cycles, which is why they're called clusters. They come in cycles, and they tend to come at the same time during the cycles, and the cycles tend to last, for me, at least a few months at a time, several times a year.
So you'll get these headaches every day?
Yes.
And they can last almost all day?
Yes.
And they can last up to 3 months?
I've had cycles that have lasted 6-7 months.
How do you live with that? How do you work? You're happily married. Tell me what your life is like managing with this.
Well, the moment I notice that a cycle is about to begin, which is that with that first little tingle of pain, I kind of devolve into a state of abject terror and dread because I know what's coming. And I think the only way that I have managed to sort of cope with it is by way of experience, and that is that I know that the pain doesn't kill me, even though I might want it to, or I might want to be taken out in some other way. But I sort of, I guess, have found a way to bargain. Like if I can get through the next 5 minutes, I won't jump off my balcony.
So
or
they're
something
known
like
as
that.
the suicide headaches.
They are, yeah.
Do you know people who've lost their lives?
I don't personally, but I do know, I've heard the stories, the anecdotal stories.
And have you thought about it?
Yeah, not sort of actively, like I've never had a plan, but it's more like a passive kind of suicidality, like I would like not to wake up. I'd like to be able to sleep, in fact. And if I could sleep, I'd like not to wake up, something like that. But I've never had a plan.
So what is your support system like?
I have great friends. I have a great husband. I have I found a cluster headache organization, which I have become a member of. In fact, I found out about it when I was hospitalized for treatment of the condition. I was in my hospital bed and about 2 years ago, and I was Googling, because during my hospitalization I was getting worse. The pain was becoming more intense, which didn't seem possible, but it was happening.
Do you think it was because of the environment at the hospital, the bright lights and the noise?
No, those aren't triggers for me. I think it was the treatment. The treatments were causing more problems than they were helping. So I was kind of at my wit's end, and I was Googling. I was in my bed and I was Googling treatments for cluster headaches. I thought I knew a lot about them, but I found an organization called Cluster Busters and started reading about alternative ways to treat the condition. And when I checked out of the hospital, I became a member of that organization and went to a conference later that year, and have made a decision to discontinue all prescription medications. I have, over the years, have been on, I think, 47 different ones over the years.
Goodness.
And none of them really work.
And what can you tell me about statistics? Do you know any statistics, like how prevalent are they?
Less than 1% of the population, I think, is the latest statistic I read. Which
Mostly men.
No, that's a myth. It's a pretty equal, 50-50 about, or maybe 60-40, something like that. But it's pretty close. It was thought for a long time that women didn't get cluster headaches, that women, migraine was the headache for women and cluster was the headache for men, but that's not so.
What do you think the biggest challenge is?
I think that there's so much that isn't known about the condition. The etiology is unknown still. I think literature mentions it historically. I think going back 200 years maybe, I might be off on that, but I think there is some mention in some literature about the symptoms that folks are linking to this condition. And I think just there's so little understood about it. And the medications, every medication that's used to treat cluster headache is used off-label, every prescription medication. Borrowed from treatments for epilepsy, seizures, migraines, other neurological conditions, but there's nothing specifically dedicated to the treatment of cluster headaches.
Is there anything on the horizon?
Not that I know of. There's a device that folks are having implanted into their skull, and there's a remote control, and you can hold the remote up to the device and it fires some electricity into the brain, and folks are noticing some relief that way, but that's a pretty drastic measure. Mm-hmm. One of the medications that I've used that was first prescribed to migraine patients is the sumatriptan injection, and it worked for me, sort of. It helped the pain to go away within about 15 minutes after the injection, but what would happen was that I'd get a rebound headache with more intense pain, and I was in this cycle of having to inject, and I was injecting 8 times the recommended dosage per day, and damaging my heart, and I have heart damage from all the medications I was taking.
Wow. Does cluster headache typically come with comorbidities?
That's a really interesting question, because I don't know what comes first. I think it does, but I don't know what comes first. The disorder or the depression, anxiety. I remember when I was hospitalized And I was there for like 2.5 weeks. I don't know how they managed to do that. Like, they knew the coding because my insurance paid for it. But the nurse came in to my room one morning and she said, you have anxiety issues, don't you? And I said, yes, I do, related to being in pain all the time. Like, I am very anxious about it. And they put this in my record. It was on my chart and in my permanent medical record that I had anxiety issues. And I addressed it with the neurologist. I said, I don't understand this. You've put this on my permanent medical record. What is an anxiety issue? Can you explain that? And why are you saying this about me? I mean, it's perfectly syntonic with the situation. It's not as though I'm, walking around in an anxious state for no reason or for no apparent reason. And he couldn't answer. We went around in circles about it. I was upset about it. And so I think that the pain, living with pain or experiencing pain that is incapacitating and terrifying, causes all sorts of other problems.
How could you not be terrified and anxious when you know it's coming?
Right. The anticipatory anxiety. Tingle. Yes, that's right. Yeah.
So there is a company that has like a migraine simulator where you put on the goggles
wow.
and it simulates what the aura looks like, the dizziness and the Alice in Wonderland syndrome. And when I watch it, it's such a moving video, but when I watch it, I get that sick, nervous feeling in my stomach, nervous, anxiety, because it makes me think or feel like a migraine's coming. So I can only imagine with cluster headache and how much worse and intense it is. How could you not feel anything but anxiety when you know it's coming?
I had an experience at the Cluster Busters has an annual conference, and I went to my second one last fall, and I'd never met anyone else with who was diagnosed as a cluster headache patient before my first conference 2 years ago. And when I was there last year, I saw someone having an attack. I'd never seen that in real life. And I couldn't watch it for more than a few seconds. I had to leave the room. I was very upset. I felt helpless, and I felt guilty for not being able to stay with this person, but it stirred me up in ways that I wasn't expecting, that I didn't really even understand at the time. It was a very profoundly jarring experience.
So what do you do when you have a cluster headache? Is there any,
I don't like anyone to be around.
Okay.
I don't like anyone to see me in that state. I'm pretty reserved generally, but when I'm in the throes of an attack, I sort of become a different person. I'm screaming, yelling, crying out, banging my head against hard surfaces, pulling my hair out. Yeah, I'm just in a complete, uncontrolled panic state, and I can't have anyone watch me do that. I'm too ashamed. I'm too ashamed of the way I'm behaving to be able to let anybody see that.
So how are you with your pain attacks now?
I have been pain-free for about 16 or 17 months.
Wow.
Which is the longest time in 32 years.
That is amazing.
It is.
Wow. Good, I'm so glad. So what advice would you give to people who are suffering from this terrible, debilitating disease?
I would suggest that people try to find out as much as they can about it, even though there's not much known about it. Link with other folks who have the same condition. And to continue trying to find ways to manage the pain. It might be by way of traditional medications, it might be by way of alternatives, but there are options available that might not be evident at first, but if you dig around a little bit, you might be able to find them.
On behalf of the Association of Migraine Disorders, I'd like to give Mark our heartfelt thanks for sharing his personal story with us. And thank you for tuning in to Shades of Migraine. For more information about migraine disease, please visit migrainedisorders.org.